Evan Hale trudged through the endless white expanse of Frostmarkety, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. The wind howled around him, carrying snow in sharp, biting sheets that whipped across his face. He squinted through the storm, trying to spot his equipment markers, but visibility was almost zero. Even with the storm warning on his wrist display, he had insisted on checking the survey points himself. A human habit, his companions often reminded him to take risks that most considered foolish. But this was Evan. He had survived far worse than snowstorms, and he trusted his instincts more than any machine. He struggled toward a metal marker half buried in snow, bracing against the wind. Frost clung to his eyelashes, and his breath came out in thick clouds. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye, faint shimmer in the snow, just a few meters from his path. Evan froze, his pulse quickening. At first, he thought it was a trick of the wind, maybe the reflection of the sun off the ice. But then he saw it clearly, a figure. Slumped and trembling in the snow, he sprinted toward it, sliding on the ice but managing to keep his balance. As he drew closer, he saw the figure was a woman, or at least humanoid, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her body was half buried in snow, and she shivered violently. Evan's training kicked in immediately. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow from her face and shoulders. She moaned softly, eyes flickering open, wide and terrified. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe. I'm here to help." Her gaze darted around, panicked, as if expecting danger at every turn. Then she shivered so violently that Evan worried she might collapse entirely. He pulled off his own insulated jacket and wrapped it around her, careful not to startle her further. "Can you stand?" he asked. She shook her head weakly. He realized her body had been exposed to the cold too long. Hypothermia was already setting in. He scooped her up carefully, mindful of her fragile frame, and carried her to his tent, which had been pitched just a few meters away. Inside, the small tent felt like a warm haven compared to the storm outside. Evan quickly activated a portable heater and arranged his emergency blankets around her. He pulled out nutrient packs and offered one to her, but she only looked at him silently, as if unsure whether to trust him. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. "You're safe here. Just rest." She stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes were a deep violet, almost glowing in the dim light, and they held a mixture of fear and confusion. Finally, she took a small sip of water and then settled under the blankets. Evan could see her shivering gradually subside as warmth returned to her body. Who are you?" he asked carefully, keeping his tone gentle. Lysera," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "I am an Ilari." Evan nodded. He had read about the Ilari, a species known for their delicate physiology and shimmering skin. Rarely did humans encounter them in the wild, and even less often alone. Most Ilari traveled with escorts or security due to their vulnerability. "What happened?" he asked. "My transport crashed," she said, her teeth chattering slightly despite the blankets. "I was alone," Evan frowned. The storm had clearly caught her off guard, but he couldn't help noticing a strange tension in her voice, an edge of fear that went beyond the cold or the crash. Something else had happened, but there wasn't time to press her yet. "Try to rest," he said. "We'll figure it out soon. You need warmth first." Lysera nodded slightly, closing her eyes, but her body remained tense. Evan understood. In her situation, she could not simply relax. He adjusted the blankets and sat near the heater, keeping a quiet watch. Hours passed slowly as the storm raged outside. Evan checked his scanner intermittently, monitoring for any signs of other survivors or approaching ships. He was careful not to disturb Lysera, but he couldn't ignore the faint ping on his device. A signal, faint but present, coming from the direction of the crash site. He leaned closer to Lysera. "Do you know if anyone else was with you?" he asked gently. She opened her eyes, hesitant. "No, I was alone. Or at least I thought so. There were others, but..." She trailed off, biting her lip. Evan waited patiently, letting her gather her courage. They were after something," she whispered finally. "Something important. They didn't care who got hurt. Evan's brows furrowed. After you? She nodded slightly. After my research? They want it. Badly, he swallowed. This wasn't just a simple accident. She had escaped from danger, and now it had followed her, possibly to him. The human in him felt the weight of responsibility. He couldn't let anything happen to her if he could help it. Okay, he said calmly. We need to be prepared. But for now, just rest. We'll figure out the rest soon. Lysera looked at him, surprised by his calm demeanor. Why? Why do you help me? Evan shrugged. Because you're freezing and alone. That's enough. Her eyes softened slightly at his words. It was the first time anyone had helped her without expectation, without fear, without hostility. She closed her eyes again, this time a little more relaxed. Evan stayed nearby, adjusting the heater and keeping watch, silently promising that no harm would come to her under his care. As night deepened, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. The wind tore at the tent fabric, and snow piled against the walls. Evan could hear faint groans from the structure under the pressure, but inside, Lysera was slowly regaining some warmth. He watched her, noting the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, grateful that she had survived the initial exposure. Suddenly, his scanner beeped sharply. He froze and looked at the display. A movement pattern was approaching from the north. He checked against Maul, faint but undeniable. Someone or something was moving toward their location. Evan's heart rate quickened. He stepped closer to Lysera, lowering his voice. Lysera, we might have company. Stay down. Stay quiet. Can you move if I help you? She nodded, fear evident in her expression. I think so. He wrapped his arm around her gently, supporting her as they moved deeper into the tent, positioning themselves near the entrance, where he could see anyone coming. He quickly gathered makeshift defenses stakes from the tent frame, some wires, and his survival tools. Improvisation would be necessary, but Evan had done this before. Humans were adaptable, and he trusted his instincts more than anything. Outside, the wind shrieked, but Evan could just make out a faint figure moving toward the tent. He took a deep breath, calming his nerves. This was not just a storm anymore. It was a test of skill, patience, and courage. Lysera watched him, wide-eyed. You? You're not afraid? She asked. Evan smiled faintly. Fear is normal, but we don't let it stop us. Stay calm, follow my lead, and we'll be fine. Her gaze lingered on him, surprised by the strange mix of courage and determination. Humans had a reputation for recklessness, she thought. But here was one who seemed fearless in a way she hadn't expected. The figure approached closer, and Evan could finally make out details of Scout. Likely sent from the group Lysera had mentioned. He raised a signal flare not to attack, but to prepare for a warning. The Scout paused, scanning the area. Evan adjusted his position, ready to act. Lysera's hand brushed his sleeve. A small, almost imperceptible gesture of trust. Evan nodded to her, acknowledging the unspoken bond. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. The Scout made a move toward the tent. Evan acted swiftly, pulling a rope and snapping a small tripwire in front of it. The figure stumbled slightly, giving him the edge to prepare the next move. Every second counted. Lysera's eyes widened in awe at his precision, the way he moved calmly under pressure. She realized humans were not just strong, they were clever, unpredictable, and, in moments like this, remarkably brave. As the Scout recovered and advanced again, Evan braced himself. The storm outside might have frozen the land, but inside the tent, a different kind of heat was building a determination to protect someone who had trusted him. No matter the danger, he glanced at Lysera, who nodded slightly, her expression determined despite her weakness. Together, they faced the approaching threat. Unaware that this night would mark the beginning of a bond, neither of them had expected a bond forged in snow. Trust and the quiet courage of a human willing to help a stranger. The storm raged. The Scout approached, and inside the small tent, Evan Hale prepared for whatever came next, silently promising that Lysera would survive this night. and for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to hope. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the storm clouds, casting a pale, ghostly glow across the snowfields. The wind had calmed, but the world outside remained harsh and unwelcoming. Evan Hale, still on edge from the previous night's encounter, kept one hand on his survival knife and the other on the small communicator he had salvaged from the storm. Lysera, the Ilari woman he had rescued, leaned heavily on him, her legs still weak from the long hours exposed to the freezing temperatures. "Can you walk?" he asked gently, glancing at her. Her shimmering violet eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I think so," she said, her voice trembling. "If you help me." Evan nodded, adjusting the blankets around her shoulders and supporting her as they stepped out of the tent. The snow crunched under their feet, each step careful but deliberate. They moved toward a higher ridge, where the terrain sloped gently upward, and where he hoped the wind would be less obstructive. His plan was to reach a point with better visibility and, if possible, establish a connection to call for extraction. As they walked, Lysara's voice broke the silence. You do not fear me," she said softly. Evan shook his head. "Fear won't help either of us. We need to stay focused, stay calm, and make it through this." She glanced at him, surprised. Humans, she had thought, were reckless creatures, unpredictable and dangerous. Yet here was one who seemed steady and reliable, someone who did not see her as a threat, only as someone in need. It was new, comforting even. "I am not used to this," she admitted. "Most humans. They do not understand us. They are afraid, or they are cruel." Evan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in thought. Fear often makes people act badly, but not all of us are like that. Her gaze softened. She could see honesty in his words, a sincerity that went beyond politeness. Slowly, she began to relax, leaning slightly on him as they climbed the icy slope. Suddenly, she stopped, her eyes narrowing toward the distance. "Evan, do you see them?" She whispered, "Dot." Evan followed her gaze and saw the faint silhouettes of figures moving through the snow. They were coming from the direction of the crash site, moving steadily but cautiously. The shapes were humanoid, but their movements were sharp, precise, almost predatory. He recognized them instantly as the same faction she had mentioned the night before, the Krith Seekers. "They're looking for you," he said calmly, though his pulse quickened. "We need to be careful. We cannot let them get close." Lysera nodded, fear flickering across her face. I thought I escaped. I did not know they would follow me here." Evan glanced at her, adjusting her grip on his arm. "You did escape. That is important. Now we just need to stay ahead and stay alive." The two moved cautiously along the ridge, seeking natural cover among rocks and icy outcrops. Evan knew that their chances would improve if they used the terrain wisely. The snow was deep in some areas, slowing the Seekers. He planned to use that to their advantage. As they advanced, Lysera began to explain more about the danger she faced. "My research. It is not ordinary," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I study star energy, ancient energy sources that can stabilize or destroy entire systems. Many factions want it. Some for good, most for power." Evan absorbed the information, careful not to react too visibly. He had expected danger, but this was beyond the usual frontier hazards. "And these Seekers, they want it for themselves?" She nodded. "Yes, they will stop at nothing to take it." He glanced around the ridge, noting the approach of the Seekers below. "Then we need to make sure they don't get it. For now, our priority is getting you somewhere safe." Lysera hesitated, her expression conflicted. I have never trusted a human like this before. Yet you helped me. You did not ask for anything. You saved me." Evan smiled faintly, though his eyes remained on the terrain ahead. "I do not need a reason to help someone in need. That is enough for me." She looked at him, her expression softening. It was a strange feeling, this sense of trust she had never experienced with humans before. She had expected fear, hostility, or betrayal, but Evan had given her none of these. Only warmth, only protection. The moment was brief. In the distance, the Seekers moved closer, their sharp, purposeful steps cutting through the snow with eerie precision. Evan crouched behind a rock, gesturing for Lysera to do the same. "Stay low," he whispered. "They haven't seen us yet. We can use this terrain to our advantage." Lysera nodded, trembling slightly, but following his instructions. Evan could see her determination growing, even as her body remained weak. She was learning quickly, adapting to the human way of survival, calm, patient, and clever. They waited as the Seekers approached, watching their movements carefully. Each one was armed with advanced rifles and scanning devices, clearly expecting resistance. Evan knew that a direct confrontation would be dangerous. They needed a strategy. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "We will move from cover to cover. We cannot outrun them in open snow, but we can use the rocks and the slope to make them slow down. Understand?" Lysera nodded. "Yes, I understand." Together, they moved in silence, each step calculated and deliberate. The Seekers followed, unaware of the human and Ilary duo above. Evan noticed a shallow ravine ahead that could serve as a temporary hiding place. He led Lysera toward it, keeping a sharp eye on the approaching enemies. Once inside the ravine, they crouched low, their bodies pressed against the icy ground. The snow muffled their breathing, and the shadows of the rocks provided enough concealment to remain unnoticed. Evan pulled out a small device from his pack, a portable scanner, to track the Seekers' movements. "They're coordinating?" he murmured. "They know you are here. They are trying to flush us out." Lysera's hand brushed against his arm. I did not mean to bring this danger to you." Evan shook his head. "You didn't. We face danger every day out here. Helping you is no different. I will not leave you." Her eyes lingered on him, filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had expected humans to be selfish, unpredictable, and violent. Instead, she found someone willing to protect her without hesitation. The realization brought a warmth she had not felt in a long time, and for a moment the cold seemed less severe, but the moment did not last. One of the Seekers noticed a faint movement in the ravine and raised an alert. The others turned, scanning the area. Evan assessed the situation quickly. They needed to act now, or risk being surrounded. "Move on my signal," he whispered to Lysera. "We go to the ridge." "I will cover you," Lysera nodded, gripping his arm tightly. Evan moved first, leading her to higher ground, using rocks and shadows for concealment. The Seekers fired warning shots. The sound of bullets ricocheting off ice filled the air. Lysera's heart pounded in her chest. But she followed Evan without hesitation. His confidence and calm reassured her. Despite her fear, she realized she could rely on him. Humans might be unpredictable, but Evan was steady, a solid presence in the chaos. As they reached the ridge, Evan quickly assessed their options. A small plateau offered better visibility and a chance to signal for help. He guided Lysera to a shallow depression, using his body as a shield as he prepared a small signal device. "Stay behind me," he said. "This will take a moment." Lysera obeyed, her trust in him absolute. She watched as he activated the device, sending a coded distress signal to any nearby ships. Her hope flickered. Perhaps rescue was possible. The Seekers were closing in. But Evan remained calm, improvising traps and using the terrain to slow them down. Lysera, despite her weakness, contributed by using minor energy pulses from her body to create flashes of light that disoriented the Seekers. Together, they formed an unlikely team-human strategy and Ilori ability working in harmony. Hours passed like this, tension stretching every moment. Lysera marveled at the human's endurance, his focus, and his refusal to abandon her. She had expected only fear, only self-preservation. But Evan's actions revealed something else entirely: courage, kindness, and the ability to fight for someone who could not fight for herself. Finally, a faint hum in the distance signaled the approach of a rescue ship responding to their distress beacon. The Seekers, realizing they were outmatched and that extraction was imminent, began to retreat, disappearing into the snow and rocks. Lysera sank to the ground, exhausted but safe. Evan knelt beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "We're not out of danger yet," he said softly. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of gratitude. She had never known a human could act with such selflessness. She had expected only survival instinct. But Evan had shown her something far rarer, a willingness to protect, to care, and to fight for another being without expectation. For the first time in her life, Lysera felt a bond forming not just of survival, but of trust, respect, and perhaps something deeper. She realized that her journey had changed forever, not because of the danger she faced, but because of the human who had chosen to stand by her side. The plateau was quiet now, the storm having faded into a cold, still morning. Lysera looked at Evan, her expression soft. "Thank you," she whispered. Evan nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll get through this, together." And in that moment, both understood that the events of this day were not just about survival. They were about trust, courage, and the beginning of a connection neither had expected, a bond forged in the snowfields of a harsh, unwelcoming world. The cold morning air bit sharply at Evan Hale's face as he helped Lysera climb toward a rocky outcrop that promised better visibility. The snow beneath their feet was crusted and slippery, forcing each step to be deliberate and careful. Despite the rescue ship now responding to their signal, he knew that the Krith Seekers would not give up so easily. They were cunning, patient, and ruthless qualities that made them dangerous foes. Lysera leaned heavily on Evan, her limbs still trembling from the night's ordeal. She had learned quickly, following his instructions, but her body had limits. "Evan, I can barely walk," she admitted, her voice soft and breathless. "You're doing great," he reassured her. "Just a little further. We'll rest when we reach the ridge." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with gratitude and something else she could not quite name. Humans were strange creatures. She realized, reckless, yet careful, unpredictable, yet reliable. This one, Evan Hale, had saved her without hesitation and continued to protect her, even in the face of danger. As they approached the plateau, the faint hum of the rescue ship grew louder. It hovered in the distance, ready to descend once they were in a clear position. Evan knew they had a small window of time before the Krith Seekers arrived, likely having tracked them despite the snow and terrain. He scanned the horizon, noting the shadows moving far below them. The Seekers were closing in, and their weapons glinted in the weak sunlight, sharp and menacing. "We need to move quickly," he said, glancing at Lysera. "We can use the rocks for cover, then signal the ship to pick us up." She nodded, clutching his arm tightly. "I trust you," she whispered. Evan's heart swelled with a quiet pride. Trust was a powerful bond, and she had placed it in him despite knowing so little about humans. "Stay close, and don't worry about a thing," he replied. They moved cautiously, taking advantage of the rocky terrain. Evan set small traps with wires and stakes he had collected, intending to slow down any pursuing enemies. Lysera, though weak, focused her energy abilities in bursts, creating brief flashes of light that disoriented the Seekers below. Together, they formed an unlikely team, their cooperation seamless despite having met less than 24 hours ago. Suddenly, a group of Seekers emerged from a nearby ridge, their movements swift and aggressive. Evan crouched behind a boulder, signaling Lysera to do the same. They were armed with rifles and scanning devices, clearly intent on capturing the Ilari researcher. "Stay down," he whispered. "We'll make them think we're retreating." Lysera nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "I will do as you say." The Seekers advanced cautiously, unaware of the traps and misdirection Evan had set. When the first one tripped over a wire, Evan seized the moment, creating a distraction by throwing a small rock toward another path. The movement drew their attention away from the ridge, giving him and Lysera a chance to advance closer to the plateau. Her energy pulses flared, subtle but effective, sending reflections across the snow and rocks. The Seekers paused, confused by the sudden flashes of light. Evan used this brief advantage to push Lysera forward, covering her with precise movements and strategic placement. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. As they reached a safer spot, Lysera glanced at him, a faint smile forming despite her exhaustion. You make me feel capable. I have never felt this way before. He shook his head with a small grin. That's because humans can surprise you. We don't always follow expectations. She laughed softly, the sound bright against the harsh landscape. For a moment, the tension eased. She realized how much she relied on him, not just for protection, but for guidance, for courage. The hum of the rescue ship grew louder, signaling it was close. Evan checked the angle and location, determining that the ship could safely hover above them if they reached a clear area. He guided Lysera to a small clearing, shielded partially by rocks, where she could remain safe while he ensured the perimeter was secure. Stay here, he instructed. I'll cover our approach to the ship. She hesitated, wanting to help, but he shook his head. No, you've done enough. This is my turn. Reluctantly, she obeyed, crouching behind a boulder while Evan moved forward, keeping low and scanning the area. The Seekers were still advancing, unaware of the approaching ship. He set another small trap, then fired a shot into the snow nearby. Drawing their attention away from Lysera, the Seekers split, trying to flank him, but Evan anticipated their movements. Positioning himself to intercept, bullets ricocheted off rocks, and the cold wind carried the sound across the plateau. Evan's focus never wavered. Each movement was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Lysera watched in awe as he maneuvered against impossible odds, defending her without hesitation. She had expected humans to be reckless and chaotic, yet Evan's every move was strategic, calm, and measured. Her respect for him deepened, mingling with something warmer she did not fully understand. Finally, the rescue ship descended, the engines blowing snow and ice in swirling gusts. The Seekers realized the situation had changed, and their momentum faltered. They retreated, leaving Evan and Lysera standing victorious, if temporarily exhausted. Evan rushed to Lysera, offering his hand. Come on, we're safe now. She took it, her small fingers gripping as tightly. Together they moved to the ship, where the crew quickly pulled them aboard. Warmth enveloped her as she looked around, her body still trembling from the cold and exertion. Inside, she finally allowed herself to relax completely. She sank into a seat, feeling the exhaustion and fear drain from her. I cannot believe it, she said softly. You risked everything for me. Evan shrugged, though his eyes held a quiet pride. I told you, humans can surprise you. We help when it matters. That's all. She studied him, her violet eyes full of admiration. I never imagined a human could be so selfless. You have changed the way I see your people, he smiled faintly. Glad to hear it. Just don't tell my team, they'll make fun of me. She laughed softly, the sound light and melodic. For the first time since the crash, she felt a genuine warmth, not just from the ship's heat, but from the knowledge that she was not alone. Evan had not only saved her life, he had shown her the potential for trust, courage, and kindness in a species she had long misunderstood. As the ship rose above the icy landscape, Lysera looked back at the plateau where they had faced danger together. The snowfields stretched endlessly, a reminder of the harsh world they had survived. She turned to Evan, her expression thoughtful. What happens now? She asked. Evan glanced at her, his eyes reflecting both determination and something softer. Now you rest. We report, we recover, and we figure out the next steps. But right now you're safe. She nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time she felt hope, not just for her survival, but for the future. She had come to this world expecting danger, betrayal, and fear. Instead, she had found trust, courage, and an unexpected friendship that had already changed her life. Evan, she began, hesitating slightly. I want my people to meet you. They need to know there is a human who would stand by an Alari without question. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. You want me to meet your people? She nodded, a small, shy smile on her face. Yes, you saved my life. And I think they should know the kind of humans who can exist. Evan considered her words. It was unexpected, yes, but the thought intrigued him. A new world, new people, The opportunity to learn and connect it was the kind of adventure he had never refused. "All right," he said finally, a smile tugging at his lips. "If the mission allows, I'll meet them." "I promise." Laysara's expression softened, her relief and gratitude evident. "Thank you, Evan, truly." As the ship carried them away from the icy plateau, both looked out at the snowfields below. The danger was behind them for now, but the experience had changed them both. Evan had discovered a new purpose in protecting someone in need. And Lysara had learned that humans, despite their flaws, could embody courage, selflessness, and kindness. The bond formed in those frozen fields was unlikely, unexpected, and extraordinary. It was built on trust, shared struggle, and the simple truth that sometimes helping another being without expectation or hesitation could change not just a moment, but an entire life. And as the ship ascended into the pale sky, Lysara rested against the warmth of the cabin, thinking of the human who had saved her. She knew, without doubt, that this encounter was only the beginning. For both of them, the journey ahead held promise, adventure, and perhaps a friendship, and more that neither had anticipated. In a galaxy often ruled by fear, greed, and power, the quiet courage of one human had shown that compassion, bravery, and trust could shine brighter than the coldest storm. And so amid the stars in distant worlds, a human and an Iolari stood together, bound not just by survival, but by the extraordinary power of kindness and the unexpected ways lives could intersect.